Okay, so it's been about a month since I switched over to this M4 iPad Pro, and I did install iPadOS 18 on this recently and have been using this for about 2 weeks now with iOS 18. And I do have some thoughts later in the video, but I just wanted to talk to you guys about what the pros and cons are of this M4 iPad Pro and what it was like switching from my M3 MacBook Air. But before we get into the good and the bad, let's quickly talk specs. The M4 iPad Pro that I'm reviewing is the 11-inch iPad Pro with 1TB of storage and cellular, so that means this M4 chip inside this iPad Pro is equipped with a 10-core CPU and GPU with 16 gigs of RAM. Now, if you opted in for the 256 gigs or 512 gig version, you'll get an M4 chip with a 9-core CPU and 10-core GPU with 8 gigs of RAM. Now, I have heard that even if you get the binned M4 chip, you're not really going to notice a difference in performance, so don't read too much into it. You'll still get a really fast performing iPad, even if you go with the base model. Now, this is also rocking, of course, the beautiful tandem OLED display that gets really bright while still giving us deep blacks and rich, vibrant colors. And in terms of its design, it's, well, a lot thinner, and the weight is really noticeable here. As someone who is using an M3 MacBook Air and the M2 12.9-inch iPad Pro, this 11-inch iPad Pro is crazy light. It's kind of crazy how portable this little thing is. It's so nice to hold, and even with the new Magic Keyboard that I have right here, it felt like I was using an 11-inch MacBook Air. It's pretty awesome. Alright, so starting off with pro number 1, and it's the tandem OLED display. Now, as someone who's been dailying an M3 MacBook Air, using this OLED display for about a month has been a game changer. I love the infinite contrast levels, the rich vibrant colors, the super accurate display that I can use as a reference display when I'm editing on my Mac. And watching videos on this, or even editing short form videos on this iPad, is just so nice. Now, it is kind of hard to show all of this off in video, but yeah, the iPad Pros with tandem OLED display is a really nice upgrade. Although we'll have to see how this holds up in a few months or in a year in reference to burn-ins. Tandem OLED is a pretty new tech that's on this iPad, so we can't really say how it'll do in the long run, but a month in, it's been pretty good. And then for pro number 2, we of course have the new accessories that you can pick up for this M4 iPad Pro. Let's start off with the Magic Keyboard, because I think the improvements they made here is really good. Now, obviously we have this new aluminum chassis up top, which is a nice change from that rubber soft material we had in the past. The keys themselves, I don't think got a redesign, but it does feel a little bit different from, what I was using on the last iPad Pro. It's less clacky in a way, but I also love that there's a proper function row on the keyboard now. With this, I'm able to adjust the brightness, volume control, turn on D&D, and basically it's what I'm used to on my M3 MacBook Air. Now, the trackpad on this 11-inch iPad Pro is quite a change for me since it's relatively small compared to my MacBook Air, but it's still very usable. Now, this white color is really nice on the silver iPad Pro, but I went ahead and installed some skins on the Magic Keyboard itself and on the iPad, so huge shout out to Dbrand for sending over their X-ray skins for my iPad Pro. If you're looking to switch things up and make your iPad Pro more unique so it stands out from the crowd, pick up a skin from channel sponsor Dbrand and make sure that your iPad is not only protected from scratches or small dings, but make sure that your Magic Keyboard is protected too. Now, if you guys want to go ahead and grab one for yourselves, make sure to go to dbrand.com/heymarkl or click the first link in the description below. And then we have, of course, the Apple Pencil Pro, which is basically the 2nd gen Apple Pencil, but more advanced. So with the Pro, you're getting haptic motors inside so that when you squeeze the pencil, you feel that vibration and you get this contextual menu or toolbox that pops up with your pens, the eraser tool, color palettes, and whatever else is relevant to your app. Now, there's also this new feature called Barrel Roll where you can, change how the tip of the pen writes down. Perfect for calligraphy. To be honest, I don't really use the pencil all that often, and if I do, it's most likely just for quick notes or if I want to relax and color on an app called Lake, which does support the new Apple Pencil Pro features. As of right now, there aren't really a ton of apps that can take advantage of these new features yet, but I'm sure as the months go by, we'll be seeing more creative apps take advantage of this new feature. Alright, this next Pro is a minor change, but I think is a necessary change, especially for those who use their iPads in a more traditional laptop form. but it's the landscape FaceTime camera. So instead of the camera at a portrait orientation and on the top, those who prefer to use an iPad in landscape now have this FaceTime camera in the middle of an iPad, so that when you're on video calls, you're not at this weird angle. And I especially like that it's an ultra wide camera too, because it kind of gives you this different perspective when you're on video calls, and pairing it with portrait mode and portrait lighting effect gives this cool ultra wide portrait like video, which is pretty awesome. And last but not least, for Pro number 4 is of course the M4 chip. While I think having an M4 chip on here on the iPad Pro is kind of overkill, it is nice to have, and it's giving us a glimpse of what future M4 chips are going to be like on Macs. Now, I personally don't get why M4 was needed for iPad, since iPadOS 18 can't really take advantage of all the power since the OS is quite restrictive. But I will say battery life is pretty good on this 11-inch iPad Pro, despite it, having less battery physically. But that new M4 chip plus that tandem OLED display is a pretty good pairing to save battery life. I'm getting somewhere around 8.5 hours of actual usage, which isn't bad for an 11-inch iPad Pro that's paired to a Magic Keyboard 100% of the time. If you're a bit more conservative or not doing a ton of video editing or photo editing, or maybe you're not playing games for hours on out, you can probably extend this to 10 to 12 hours of actual usage, but definitely not an all-day laptop like my M3 MacBook Air. Okay, so for performance, now I did run Geekbench 6 here on this M4 iPad Pro, my M3 MacBook Air, and M2 iPad Pro 12.9 inch, and here are the results. Now here we can see that the M4 iPad Pro was able to score 3,685 for its single core score, while the M3 scored just a bit over 3,000 and the M2 was around 2,850. And then for multi-core, we're getting over 14,000 on the M4, and the M3 we're just getting over 11,000, and M2 we're just getting under that 11,000 threshold. And then when it comes to its GPU with Metal, we're getting 53,427 for M4 and just under 48,000 for M3 and roughly around 44,000 on M2. Again, from that M2 iPad to this M4, it's a pretty big jump in terms of graphics power and CPU power. Now, obviously, you can't really judge its performance over Geekbench tests, but from what I can tell, from the apps that I've been able to test, like Logic Pro for iPad 2, Final Cut Pro for iPad 2, and DaVinci Resolve, and a few other creative apps, everything just felt a lot snappier and feels more instantaneous compared to my M2 iPad Pro. Now, that could simply just be a placebo effect. I also didn't think that the M2 iPad Pro was slow by any means, but there were definitely some tasks that took maybe a minute longer on the M2 that made the M4 feel snappier and overall much faster in everyday tasks. But I think the M4 chip on this iPad Pro, as fast as it is and as overkill as it may seem, in my opinion, is merely used for future-proofing. All right, now we're in a section of the video where we go over what I didn't find all that great or would love to see an improvement next time around. And starting off with con number 1, and it would have to be iPadOS. Now, iPadOS, like I briefly mentioned earlier, is mid at best, at least for hardware like this iPad Pro. Like, I love how simple it is. Yes, that's great. It's basically a bigger iPhone, but in just, a bigger scale. I'm genuinely surprised that, WWDC came and we saw iPadOS 18, and I actually have iPadOS 18 installed on this very iPad, and I've been using it for close to 2 weeks now, and it's literally the same exact experience as the last few iPadOS that we've used with some minor improvements. Now, I was really hoping to see an improvement in the Files app or maybe even improvement in Stage Manager, but all we got here are tinted or dark icons, ability to put the icons anywhere, a redesigned control center, the calculator app with math notes, which I will say it's pretty cool. But for a power user who wants an iPad as their main computer and deals with a lot of files in Windows, they're gonna find iPadOS to be a little bit cumbersome. It's totally usable, but it's just, you gotta really figure out ways to make things work. The file system, in my opinion, is wonky, and window management, even with Stage Manager, is a little bit odd. Personally, I just don't see iPadOS as an operating system that can directly compete with macOS and Windows. There's just a lot more core features missing that I love using on a more traditional computer, and with iPadOS where it is today, it's still very limited or restricted in terms of what you can do with it, right? So one of the biggest things for me, like I keep saying earlier, is file management. I think Finder in Windows Explorer is way better than using the Files app. I love using multiple tabs and windows on Finder and macOS, and it just helps me chaotically organize my files and I'm not restricted on how many windows I have open. I also love having plugins within the OS, so I use an app called Unclutter, which is a swipe down on the menu bar on the Mac, which brings quick access to, my notes, my files, and my clipboard history. But yeah, things like that affects the whole OS system wide is what makes macOS and Windows a proper computer operating system, because it's not as restrictive like iPadOS. But if you don't really care about those things and you think Stage Manager is more than enough for you, or you're okay with basic functionality of the Files app, then that's great. The iPad is exactly the kind of computer that you should be using. It's simple and pretty straightforward. Now, the second con would be the Magic Keyboard. And yes, I know I said the Magic Keyboard is awesome, but there's one little thing that annoys me about this new one, and it's the fact that it's not a very good keyboard to have on your lap. At least this 11-inch keyboard isn't. Maybe the 13-inch is better, I don't know, but what I mean by that is when you have this iPad with a new Magic Keyboard and you have it fully extended out like this, and it's on your lap, on top of your pillow when you're sitting down, it's bound to tip over because this new design isn't completely flat, unlike the last Magic Keyboard. And when you've got an uneven surface, it kind of just tips over the entire iPad, and you kind of have to finagle it so it doesn't tip over when you're using it on the go. Very minor thing here, but it's still worth noting in case you do plan on getting the 11-inch iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard. But when you're on a completely flat surface like a desk, for example, it's perfect in my opinion. Okay, so for my last con, and you can agree to disagree with me here, and it would have to be the price. Now, I get it, hardware-wise, this is the best iPad Pro that they've ever came out with. It's exceptionally thin. It features, state-of-the-art tandem OLED display that looks really beautiful to look at. And of course, that M4 chip that is ridiculously fast. But man, when the iPad Pro starts, at $999 with 256 gigs of storage, it feels weird and kind of hard to recommend, because if you spec this up like this one that I've been using, for example, it's a 1 terabyte with cellular. I also have the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil Pro, and it comes out to just under $2,300 before taxes. And you know what else is on Apple's website for $2,300? A fully spec'd out M3 MacBook Air with 24 gigs of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage. Granted, you don't have the extra power from that M4 chip, nor do you have an OLED display with touchscreen, but what you are getting is a bigger display, MagSafe charging, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, an operating system that isn't going to limit you on how many windows you want open, and offer a better file management system. So yeah, that's the M4 iPad Pro in a nutshell. It's very much an iPad Pro that has an OLED display that does iPad things much faster than before. I think if you look at this machine without comparing it to a MacBook or Windows laptop, you're gonna love this thing. But if you keep thinking that this iPad is useless without macOS, then this iPad is definitely not for you. You're better off with a MacBook Air. I know plenty of people who use an iPad every single day for work and for creating art that prefers an iPad over a MacBook just because they have access to so many apps and it has a touchscreen. And if they need to, they can convert the iPad into a laptop that they can use on the go with this Magic Keyboard. And those types of people are going to love this M4 iPad Pro, and it's definitely a worthy upgrade for those people. Now, if you already have, let's say, an M2 iPad Pro, I really don't think it's worth upgrading to this, just because I think the M2 iPad Pro is still very much a really, really good iPad Pro. But if you have an iPad from 2018 or an older iPad Air and you're looking to upgrade, then this new iPad Pro is worth it, in my opinion. I think the lighter chassis, the OLED display, the new accessories from Apple really is worth the money to give you the best experience on this iPad Pro series. Anyways, that's been it for this video. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you all so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.